the process and actually even debate or discuss or even know what was fully in any of these bills. You've seen versions of that with the health care bill where, the Baucus bill or whatever is already running to 1,000 pages, and that's without the 500 amendments that have been attached to it already. People are starting to understand more fully, at least in the 21st century, with a clean slate where we had a Republican big government president and a Democratic big government president, that the problem is big government, that it is a slow lurching beast that destroys much more than it protects or preserves. And again, we've gone through a social revolution, a cultural and economic revolution over the past 30 years, where individuals at all levels of society are more in control of what they want in most parts of their lives, and now they are finally demanding it in politics as well.
I like that, a slow lurching beast that destroys more than it protects. Nick Gillespie, thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure, Judge.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Freedom Watch, a daily dose of raw liberty streaming online at foxnews.com. I'm your host, Judge Andrew Napolitano, here defending freedom, defending your natural rights, and defending your right to have a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution. In a new book called The Death of Conservatism, Sam Tannenhouse, editor of the New York Times Book Review, argues that George W. Bush destroyed the conservative movement in this country. He fought illegal wars, inherited a surplus, but spent more money than all his predecessors combined, bailed out banks and automobile manufacturers, federalized education and prescription drugs for seniors, and spied without warrants on whomever he wanted. He even arrested Americans without charge or trial, something not admittedly done since the days of Abraham Lincoln. And he did all that in the name of something he called compassionate conservatism. I've read the Tannenhouse book, and I've interviewed Sam about it. But what I want to know is, what movement then has the ability to reshape the Republican Party and bring it back to its Barry Goldwater roots? Shall I say libertarianism? Joining me now is Nick Gillespie, editor-in-chief of Reason.com and Reason TV. Nick, it's a pleasure for me. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you, Judge. I always feel very welcome here.
Well, I'm trying to make you feel welcome. God bless you. Tannenhouse's book, here's a guy who's probably a liberal Democrat, a lifelong employee of the New York Times, the official biographer of William F. Buckley, tells me off the record but not on air, in between breaks and interviewing him about the book, probably the same thing he told you, that the libertarians today are the only true conservative Republicans left. Do you agree? And if so, what does he mean?
Yeah, well, I think that there's no question that small L libertarians, people who believe in the decentralization of power and the empowerment of the individual in every decision-making process to the maximum degree possible, is where the energy has been in conservative politics. Back in 1975, just after he had left the governorship of California, Reason magazine, the magazine that I've worked for years, interviewed Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan in that interview said, libertarianism is the heart and soul of the conservative movement. I think it has always been the case. The power of conservative ideas has never been about social conservatism. It has never been about trying to hold back the past, or as Bill Buckley's magazine National Review would put it, stand athwart history yelling stop. It has always been about the classical liberal project that reaches back into the 16th or 17th, 18th century that the founding of this country was actually based on, which is the idea that individuals in decentralized decision-making processes have more information and have more rights. Things that you write about in Dred Scott's Revenge and your other works, that we have rights that need to be respected, and that society works better when government respects those rights and allows people to create voluntary institutions that serve their needs, which change over time, and we move into the future that way. So I think libertarianism, and when you think about somebody like Milton Friedman, who was advised several Republican administrations, he was a libertarian, he wasn't a conservative, and what he was about was saying that individual school children should be able to choose where they go to school. People should be able to, his main book, or one of his most popular books, was Free to Choose. That's the point, and that's where the energy in American politics is.
How did we get to a point where a former governor from Texas, son of a moderate, middle-of-the-road, but still big government Republican president, runs as a conservative, coins some phrase, compassionate conservatism, and governs like he's Lyndon Johnson? Maybe even governs like he's FDR or Abraham Lincoln. You've heard me say in the pages of Reason magazine, and I fervently believe this, that George Bush has shown less fidelity to the Constitution than any president since Abraham Lincoln. I mean, he governed as a conservative, as if the Constitution didn't exist. How did we get there?
Well, I think part of it is that the Republican Party and the conservative movement, broadly speaking, was really kind of hijacked by being in control, by being in power. When the Republicans took over Congress in 1994 and then the White House in 2000, they got used to being in power. And the way that government works in most of the industrialized world, or actually all of the industrialized world, is that when you get the levers of power in your hand, you don't give them up. And in fact, you work them faster and faster and give more and more goodies to your friends, or you start to realize, the view from the top, like I'm really in charge here. And I think that's part of the problem. Bush, I don't think, there's some evidence that he was evil. I mean, that he was he was a sinister guy in many ways. I don't think he was. I think that he genuinely mistook his ability to do good in the world, and he confused that, as politicians typically do, with their ability to be in power and to call all the shots.
I only know two people.
It was disastrous.
I only know of two people who've run for national office: Barry Goldwater running for president, and Ron Paul in his repeated runs for Congress, who openly said, "My goal is to shrink the government." Other than that, almost everyone who gets in power, even Ronald Reagan himself, which is why in the intro I said return to our Barry Goldwater roots and not our Ronald Reagan roots. Right. Even Ronald Reagan himself ultimately increased taxes, ultimately increased regulation, ultimately put the federal government into places where it had never been. So question, is this a tidal wave that will never stop? Does it not matter whoever gets into power? Is there just a Republican version of big government and a Democrat version of big government, but no one who'll return us to the Barry Goldwater roots?
There is certainly, a empirical case that can't be denied that there is a Republican version of big government and a Democratic version of big government. And we've just lived through the Republican version of big government, and we are now living through the Democratic, or the latest iteration of the Democratic version of big government, where I do think, these things happen in waves, but it's also true that there's a pushback, there's a counter movement. And what we're seeing is that Obama, on virtually every level, whether we're talking about foreign policy and doubling down in Afghanistan, whether we're talking about bailouts, stimulus spending, you name it, he is not creating something new here. He is following in the well-worn grooves of George Bush and putting things on steroids a bit, but it's a continuation of the Bush policies by and large. And I think what we're starting to see in Obama's relatively slipping poll numbers and pushback on the economy and on various, on Afghanistan, on you name it, on healthcare, you are seeing the beginning of the understanding that people recognize that government can't do it all, even if it wanted to. It can't afford to. And individuals know that in every other part of their lives, service is getting better, technology is moving ahead, innovation is moving ahead. It isn't happening in the public sector because it can't. The public sector plays by different rules. And I think you're seeing people finally saying, I want the kind of individualized, cheaper and better service that I'm getting everywhere else in my life in government. And this is the beginning of a libertarian movement where individuals are free to choose the schools their kids go to, the health care plans that they want, their retirement plans, things like that.
Here's a phenomenon that I've noticed, and I wonder if you have as well. I speak all over the country. You know that. You and Reason have sponsored a number of my speeches. But I have found since the presidency of Barack Obama and the assault on our financial rights, the assault on the concept of a binding contract, the notion that the government can loan money to a bank and then control the salary of its executives and control the investment it makes. This has made it easier to expose things that were done in the past under Republicans that have violated other constitutional liberties. For example, just 3 weeks ago, I received a standing ovation in Fort Worth, Texas, emphasis Texas, when I attacked the Patriot Act and its violations of the Fourth Amendment and the manner in which it came about with no debate and no opportunity